Hi ladies and gentlemen, this is basically an extension of the last two videos, basically to talk a little bit more about the light. I have a specific scripture that I want to read, and it'll help you to understand who basically is doing the right thing. And of course, you know, God's forgiveness is all part of this as well, but we want to talk about the specifics of what this entails, okay? It's also designed, this video, to answer the question of a person who wrote in on one of those last two videos and commented and said, well, I want to renounce war, but then how do I know when it is right to fight? Under what circumstances? Now, I've already kind of basically answered that by saying, first of all, that by their fruits you shall know them. In other words, you know, what is the end result? What's going on? What do you see happening? And we're going to talk about that just a little bit with the scripture I'm going to read. But it's also, there's a scripture that says that a man who won't care for his own household is worse than an infidel. Well, if you're caring for somebody, feeding them and working for them and all that, well, certainly the next step of defending them but with force if their lives are in danger would apply as well. So those two things, to those of you who have questions about that, it's what's the motivation in the heart. And then when nations are involved, how do you tell what their real motivation is? Well, that's called due diligence, and that's why you have to know what the real motivation is behind your leaders. You just can't blindly follow them whenever they say jump. That's your responsibility as a being of light, housed in a physical tabernacle at this point, which hopefully at some point will be raised to a higher level. That's theology I believe in. But let's talk about this situation with the lights and how it impacts this last question of this gentleman, I imagine. I'm in Isaiah 33, and the real crux of the matter is in verse 15. Now, I said before that the Hebrew scriptures are really special. They're poetic. They're rich. There really isn't any writer in history that can compare to the scriptures. The best Hemingway, the best Steinbeck, even Shakespeare can't come close to this. Amongst all of the writers, probably the most eloquent was Isaiah. And that's why we're going to read Isaiah today, because I think what he says here will tell you a little bit more about this light situation, what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to be to get to the best place, and number two, answer the question about motives. Okay, so here we go. Motives of war. All right, whether it's self-defense or for greed or those types of things, and this will answer that, I'm sure, on both counts. So remember, we were talking about that God is the Father of lights. Well, what kind of light does he dwell in? What kind of light did we dwell in before we came here? And what kind of light are we going to dwell in when we go back? Listen to this. The sinners, starting with verse 14, chapter 33, verse 14, starting there. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Interesting, hypocrites. Question. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? See, things that are evil can't approach God. They're burned up because he is so bright. And we're supposed to be bright as well. So the question is, how do we get to live in everlasting burnings? What will keep us from getting there? What do we need to do? Verse 15. To get there, who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? Answer in verse 15. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly. He that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him, his waters shall be sure. Let me explain just a little of that, because some of that sounds a little confusing. Let's take the first one. Okay, it's pretty obvious. Walk righteously and uprightly. Pretty obvious. You despiseth the gain of oppressions. In other words, you don't involve yourself in wars of aggression or oppress people or take their money, steal from them, take their land, take their lives for power, for gain, whether in small situations or in large, like amongst nations. You have to do your due diligence and know why the nation is doing what it's doing. That shaketh his hands from the holding of bribes. That's pretty obvious. Now here's one that might be a problem for you. That stoppeth his ears from the hearing of blood. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean, that hearing about blood is bad or whatever? It's talking about something specific. That within a group of people you decide you're going to murder one person or many people for greed, for power, for oppression, for aggression. Okay? So if you're in a group of people and they're saying, whether in a small group of individuals or in a huge nation that's out there saying, we want to go kill these people, you don't hear it. You refuse to take part in that, is what it's saying. You do not do it. It's better to rend your clothes and be cast in prison than to take part in that. And the final statement, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. Does that mean that we don't recognize evil? No, it's the same idea. Seeing evil become powerful. Doing things to help it go along. It's not the idea of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. There's a lot of truth in that. But you can't ignore evil either. It's if you take part in it. If you see it and you do nothing to stop it, whether in yourself or somewhere else. I hope you find that of interest. Remember, we are the children of the Father of lights. And that Father of lights, remember when he appeared to Moses, it was a burning bush. The bush was on flame. It was in flames, but it wasn't consumed. Remember? So it wasn't a typical fire. It was a brightness. Everlasting burnings. A devouring fire. To live there. And to be pure enough that it does not consume us. And again, how do we do that? Read it one more time. You walketh righteously, speaketh uprightly. Despise the gain of oppression. That you do not shake hands and accept bribes. That you stop your ears and your eyes from hearing blood and seeing evil. In other words, supporting it, going along with it. So, Isaiah 33, chapter 33, verses 14 and 15. Just a little explanation, I thought that would be necessary. Due diligence of ourselves, a search of our hearts, our motives, and the same for the nations. Thank you very much.